I was once introduced to a woman who I found to be exquisite. I was daunted by her elegance, and her presence welcomed me in a space that was beyond anything I'd known. We took years to dance around each other, and at a certain point, I had a dream that a woman was teaching me how another woman, an older woman, was teaching me how to recognize her, how to be present with her in a way that attracted her. Within a time, we became closer to the extent that I could tell her about this dream, and she said the woman's name, and I learned the woman's name in my dream. That was her grandmother. From then on, we had an extremely deep connection, and when things got intense, I could feel her thinking with me. On 9/11, I was shaken, overwhelmed. I lived near the towers, and I yelled at her in my mind because she hadn't called to check in on me. And as I was getting angry, she called. This happened again in the future, and increasingly I came to trust this was real. At the time, I was utterly daunted by embracing the truth, the reality of something like this. It was shattering everything I'd known, and it was so intense that truly not much else mattered. I was enthralled in a world of attention where my old entertainment and activities and interests just paled in comparison to the truth of this. Within a year, I was participating in conversations online, trying to explain what I was experiencing, what I was learning, and I wasn't finding much companionship. One day, I encountered someone I'd already known in other conversations, and he was telling a story of a time when he met a woman and they linked in and started thinking with each other long enough to then stare at each other and speak out loud, "Oh my God, that was really you." It shook me so deeply, I actually got angry at him online. I'm like, "You have to be careful with what you're talking about. And, you have no idea how much this can trigger people who read you." And he responded, "Wow, I'm kind of touched. I didn't know I would be able to affect other people this much." And it took me quite a while to come to terms with the fact that, I was seeing a reflection. Like, I was constantly trying to evoke this level of intensity of awakening in other people. And then when I got triggered, I was shaken and even so overwhelmed I could feel anger. As time progressed, this just became a more consistent part of my life. And the quality and clarity of my connections became so strong that it often outweighed what was happening in the world around me. I remember having a conversation with a woman I lived with, a roommate, and she was not in a good mood. And out loud, we were having one conversation, but I felt her thoughts criticizing me. And it was so stark, so vibrant that the presence, my presence, with the subconscious communication that I was making conscious was more real than vocalizations. And I called her on it. I said, "Hey, did you just say that?" And she said, "No, that's just the kind of thing I think." This was yet another threshold in me going, "Oh my God, this shit is real. Extremely daunting to believe it. For whatever reason, I stayed with this priority. I got rid of all my CDs. Eventually, I wanted to be even more untethered to explore what I was learning. And the gift of that was definitely tangled with the curse. See, it's one thing to experience a somewhat grounded life where these experiences pierce into your reality and shake you up so much that you get an exposure to the daunting and exquisite nature of reality. It's quite another to fully open yourself to the extent that you have to take these things in every day. You have to learn how to manage what an open state of consciousness entails. The only way I know to come to terms with this is to essentially find a spiritual mentor. Angels, and for me, Thoth. It's sort of embarrassing on one level, but utterly understandable overall. The intensity of the presence of other beings can just shake you up so much that once you link into them, you can't disengage. And make no mistake, lots of beings communicate on these levels. So you slowly and certainly begin to come to terms with how nice it is to be able to block all this stuff out. In fact, you get deeper into an awareness of what life on earth is. This experience in a human consciousness, in many cases, liberates you from the intimacy of a shared mind. As a result, you get to experience isolation. In a new age, where many teachings somewhat haphazardly talk about, we are all one, there is no separation, you get to come to terms with the fact that it's kind of nice to have some separation. In fact, that's a big part of why we're doing this, and it's a big part of why we put up with the extraordinary range of suffering on this planet in this form. Because it's really nice to get some distance from a shared consciousness. In fact, when you're in a group mind, you function sort of like a flock of birds. Have you ever watched a flock of birds? Crows are great, starlings, tons of different kinds of birds. They move together, and you can loosen your gaze on the individual birds and recognize this extraordinary being moving, thinking together. You can't peg one of them and say that one is in charge. In fact, that kind of mentality doesn't relate. There's a group consciousness that's in charge, and I promise you, they are thinking, and yes, they do think. They are thinking together. Human beings can do this. In fact, our higher selves do this. The part of ourselves that incarnates into consciousness gives us access to a more independent mind. And from the perspective of a higher self, of a soul incarnating onto earth, it's really exciting to be able to experience this kind of separation. You're not separated in every way. You're separated from the shared thought process of a group mind. And it's not even complete, because this other aspect of you is there sharing thoughts with everyone who is part of your soul group. When you recognize and begin to access these planes of consciousness, it's kind of funny. It's very practical in a way. You'll find that all the beings that love you deeply, beings that love you much more than you may be able to recognize within this lifetime, stay with you in a sense. So you may have experienced in this life that you have a divergence, a breakdown of a love that you shared with a friend or an ex. And yet, when you begin to access your higher self, you might encounter a consciousness they love you so much more than you can imagine. And they're committed to being a part of your life in another life. So you're on pause. It's not easy to experience and share love within a temporal consciousness where there's a finite level of sharing that's possible. And because there's a finite level, we have different periods of time with different beings who we love deeply. And when we put a boundary, when we say, okay, this chapter's over, we're not going to share anymore, that doesn't mean they don't love you anymore. I'm going to transition into a new conversation on this theme next. But first, I'm going to do a little housekeeping. I can't promise anything at this point in terms of what's going on with this channel. My intuition and my guidance is going a bit haywire. So I can't get clarity on where this is going, which usually means something exciting. I respond in, two basic ways to this, in the same way that many people do. If I resist and try to cling to the past or try to give you clarity on what I'm going to do in the future too quickly before I can see it, there's a lot of resistance. There's like a suffering that gets created because something else in me is saying, hey, no, we're going to try. And I'm getting tugged and pulled. And that's been happening for the past month. I tried to give an update last week, 2 weeks, a week and a half ago, that was, offered a bit more clarity. And then the next class, last week's class, I had this freaking torrent of drama. I don't know if you watched it, but at the end of the class, there was a drama, shall we say. And first of all, I just want to appreciate each of you that helped me during that time. It was much less disturbing than I anticipated, but it really is kind of jarring to have, there was like 100 people showed up with nasty negative comments all at once. Apparently this is a thing. And I just remember Haldi, I couldn't read it. It was going so fast, but I saw two things I saw. One was some stranger at maybe they were intending to insult me, but they asked, can you really see the future? So they were obviously a little bit curious on some level. And I used that. That was the only thing I saw for a while. And I used that and I used it as a tool to kind of get my focus and talk about it a little. So I wasn't, being overwhelmed on the same level that it started at. So that was interesting that was one of the only things I saw. And then the only other thing I saw as it was flying by was Haldi saying, this space is protected by love and light. This space is protected by love and light. And it just made my heart smile so much. I'm like, bless you so much. Thank you, Haldi. That was really awesome. So one last little segue. My physical vision is really challenged. Any given day, I can't read a book. I don't read very much anymore. It's hard to maintain my focus. It ends up creating a great amount of strain in my face and definitely around the eyes. It's frustrating because my son loves it when I read and, I can't even predict yet what mood I'm in or what the correlation is between when I can see and when I can't. But as much as when I look at a crowded room of people, it's often a blur and I can't tell faces apart, every once in a while, all the way across the room, I get a perfectly clear vision of a very interesting side of someone I know. I know exactly who they are. I sense that connection more prominently than anything else in a very intuitive way. Meaning it's clearly important that I recognize that person and the presence that I see them in is what I'm connecting to. So my consciousness has sort of given up the ability to see in what I used to think of as normal, what most people think of as normal. But as a result, I get this exposure to a stunning range of vision of other people. And that is deeply connected to my ability to recognize you intuitively, energetically, across any distance. So I neither recommend nor discourage you from trying to learn how to do this. I think only you know whether it's worth it. Only you know whether it's you, whether it's your calling. If you're on such a path, I share as best I can how I do it, what I've learned, and hopefully mechanisms that can enable it to be a little less isolated for you than it is for me, a little more effective, more normal. It's up to you whether you embrace that, whether you sense within yourself the calling to do it, and particularly if you sense within yourself a calling that will take you ideally beyond what I could do into a healthier version, a more inspired version, or just a version that's more you. That being said, sometimes you have to believe things before you recognize them. My role, as I've been taught to recognize over and over and over again, is to be a bit of a lighthouse. So I staked out some territory. I was called into some psychic consciousness that, I'm trying to ground it out. And in many ways, I might not learn much further than I've gotten in this life. I certainly hope I will, but I'm being told lately that a big part of my challenge is that I'm trying to learn more when it's not time to learn more. I love learning. I love it. And yet when I'm busy straining against the boundaries of my current knowledge, I'm not doing the work to sift through what I know and teach it in a way it's going to empower you, potentially much more than I could have ever been empowered. It's going to empower me to be clear on what I know and to work through a more careful way to understand it and hold it that might actually end up being a great foundation for me to go further. That being said, it's really intense tuning into the truth of this. Sometimes you have to believe things before you can rest on them, before you can even recognize them. I can give you some frameworks with a confidence that if you just trust that this is true, it's going to open doors for you. You're going to have to hold it for a while. You're going to have to work through any resistance or doubt, but you don't have to struggle like a fight. You just have to persevere. Bring yourself back again and again to question things, sift through them, look at them from several different angles. I'm giving you one clear angle, and I pray that it's a blessing to you. You have beings, souls in your life who love you much more than you can recognize from a strictly human consciousness. These beings look after you. They pray for you. They think with you, whether you recognize them or not. Some of them are people who you may think you're estranged from. Some of them are people who you might have broken down with, left with anger, and never fully reconciled. And yet their higher self exists from a state of consciousness that loves you much more than that. And they do basic things like praying gifts for you into your life. It's somewhat akin to co-creating reality, like an interesting and somewhat amusing negotiation. If you take a number of the core people in your life, you can learn to recognize that they essentially give you a bit of a prayer package. They have a certain amount of energy that's connected with you, that's shared. So there are limits to how much they can give you, hope for you, nudge into existence for you. And they make choices on how to invest that. So some of them may be focused on helping you in your relationship. If you're fighting with your partner, someone you live with, they might extraordinarily care about that and put an emphasis on praying for you to change that hostility. Now we're talking about people who you might think don't care about you anymore, but their higher self much definitely does. And they're giving you this slate. They're saying, I have this package of love where I want this to be present when you're angry to help temper your anger. I have this inspirational little thought ball to take some more space for yourself and breathe and listen to the birds. So they give you this prayer. I hope he breathes and listens to the birds. I hope he breathes and listens to the birds. I hope he sits outside, breathes, and listens to the birds. Now, let's suggest maybe you don't do this very much, but someone in your consciousness, someone who is part of your greater existence beyond this life, is giving you that prayer. And it's a mishmash what comes into reality. So perhaps someone is praying for this for you for years, and they're convinced it's what you need, but somehow it just never makes it through into your experience. You feel the pull, you negate it. Every time you negate something that's strongly present in you, there's a bit of waste going on. Ideally, you want to learn to weave with all the different prayers in your mind, but you're getting prayers from many different people, hoping, encouraging you to be more present in this life. And they all have slightly different agendas. It's an extraordinary level of consciousness. And I assure you, it's a frequency range. You've just got a barrier to it. There's a wall in you. And that wall is pleasant in a way. It keeps you contained. It's a bit like a mirror. I talk about this in Beyond Normal, and a video, incidentally, which I think is just awesome, but it didn't really catch on. So if you want to check it out, it's in the Welcome to Wildflower Fire playlist. And I'm trying to sort of artistically get you to be present with the fact that you exist within boundaries, and you often can't see the boundaries because the boundaries look like mirrors. Now, if you put a mirror in a room with a window, you'll recognize pretty quickly that creates a sense of expansiveness in the room. There's more light and there's more depth because it looks like, your reality goes further in that direction. But of course, if you walk into the mirror, you'll bump. So you develop this dual consciousness in relation to the room, which says, I can't actually go past that point, but it's kind of exciting over there. But over there is kind of like over here. And the end result is it keeps you within these boundaries in a way that's kind of pleasant. You're existing like that already. Beyond the boundaries of these mirrors, you start to recognize it's where. It is where, in consciousness, it's the frequency range where the thoughts of your higher self and the higher self of other beings live. There are other boundaries where the thoughts of animals exist. And there are mirrors there too that prevent you from going in that direction. So when you start to play around with transcending those mirrors, it can be helpful to have a bit of a framework for how to handle it. Because in my experience, I desperately wanted to get past these boundaries, desperately, so much that I was willing to try to ignore everything else. Then once it actually worked, I'm like, whoa, I've got a lot of problems now that I didn't have before. The gift, the absolutely magnificent gift of accessing the frequency range of your higher self is that you begin to recognize the higher selves of other beings who love you. Now, the challenge of it is that on the same frequencies, your pain gets repressed. So when you repress the pain and trauma of relationships within this lifetime, and you just say, I can't deal with this anymore, and push it away, that energy can't be created or destroyed. You can't just make pain and emotional drama disappear. So it's like taking, you can play different songs on a radio station and many different frequencies, 94.5, 89.6, 99.2. All those different frequencies are different radio stations. I know radio stations are somewhat archaic, but perhaps you know enough about it to still be able to use this as an analogy. You could play the same song in all three of those frequency ranges. It sounds the same. So if your consciousness is used to operating at 94.5 and you develop a drama with someone else when you're on 94.5, you might be able to move that drama to 99.6. Then you say, I'm not going to listen to 99.6. You're just going to go back to 94.5, and now it's a little freer. The programming's free. You don't have to listen to that song. But you don't just exist on one frequency. You exist on a range of frequencies. So even if you focus your attention on 94.5, you're going to have some relationship to these other channels. I'm telling you that when you expand the range of your channels, into these ranges that are creature consciousness and higher self consciousness, you have a broader ability to work with the life that you're living. And in some cases, what that means is you actually repress by externalizing, pushing away dramas in this lifetime into the frequency range that's actually occupied by your higher self. And your higher self in conversation with the higher self of someone with whom you've experienced a lot of pain. Thus, in order to gain access to the truth of how much you actually love each other, you have to go and work through some of that drama because it exists and it's happening there. You might have thought you got rid of it because you're not focused on it, but you didn't get rid of it. I say this in 9,000 different ways in all the different classes and many different videos. You have to somehow hold the intention to get into that drama and work with it in order to heal it. And when you do, you don't just get the liberation from the drama. You don't just get the potential to create with all that energy, which is also pretty awesome. You also gain access to this extraordinary depth where you begin to recognize that you are essentially scripting a play. A play. Sometimes it's a painful play, a dramatic play with tragedy in it, but you were scripting that with someone else. You need to kind of set aside why. It's karmic in almost every case. Karmic / the earth asked you to take on a certain depth of intensity. Just let that be enough for now. And so you had to work through all these karmic energies and you ended up in a drama. If you could come to terms just this much to say, no, you really do love each other. You really do. You really do. It's real love. It just exists on this extraordinary range. And the first way you can begin to access that is from this gratitude space. Ask to see what they're praying for. See, that the extraordinary truth here is that many of the people who may be interested in listening to this class are probably more conscious in your physical body than other beings. I first invite you to really recognize that some other beings simply aren't all that conscious in their body. That's not because they themselves are so diminished. It's because a bigger part of their consciousness exists somewhere else. Somewhere else. And when they have made that choice, perhaps they're just using this entire lifetime to work through muck. They don't really want to be perfectly, deeply present in this body because this lifetime is not going to be that happy for them. They have a finite amount of muck to work through, and they're just living this life to work through the muck. They're transmuting karma. They're just moving through it. They'd rather not be exquisitely present with all the feelings involved because they're painful. So they made this pragmatic choice, and to you on the surface, they look like not a very pleasant person. But the reality is they have a higher self that's there somewhere else. Now you start to apply this to the people in your life who think of someone who's extremely charged. They've been a very intense part of your life, but you don't have particularly good feelings for them these days. For whatever reason. Now I invite you to ask this question. What are they praying for you? Chances are, if someone's higher self, if someone is more focused in their higher self than in their human body, in their human daily consciousness, chances are they're coming from a space of love, and they may well be praying love for you. Ask what it is. Because as it so happens, it's usually not just love. They usually have some degree of awareness for who you are. They're praying that you learn to sit outside for 5 minutes and listen to the birds and breathe. They're making that prayer for you. They're praying that you pick up that instrument that you haven't picked up in 10 years. And it's the nature of this extraordinary kind of consciousness that they'll keep praying that way for years. They're not talking to you. They haven't talked to you for 10, 15 years, but their soul is woven with you. There might even be in your soul group. So they're completely committed to you in the long run. And they're praying this deeply for you. And they're praying this specifically for you. And then you start to realize there's this wide range of prayers coming at you from lots of different beings. I really encourage people to think in terms of 150. It's like 150, 200 people, beings, are this intimate with you. They're giving you this level of prayerfulness. They're giving you a little list of insight, of inspiration, of hope that they pray into your life. Some of them are praying to help you temper your problems. Some of them are praying to help you balance out your addictions. Some of them are praying to inspire creativity where it's been dead for a while. Some of them are praying for you to chill out because you're too tense. And the combination of all these forces is kind of the palette that you have to work with day after day. And it's up to you to tune in and recognize what's going on. What do you want the most? You might think that it's just random, but as it so happens, it's very present. It's the result of a lot of people who love you, and it's well worth it to tune in and recognize who they are and what they want for you. This is telepathy. The form of telepathy that people often might consider telepathy, this idea that I can just send a message to you, consciousness to consciousness. It's both rare and not the most important thing for you to discover. Now, it won't be rare eventually, but I assure you, don't run headlong into it. It's not appropriate. The first thing that you're going to encounter is this telepathy between your conscious mind and the higher self of other beings. And one of the first things you encounter there is the recognition that actually there's a wide range of beings who are cut off from their souls, but they're in their spirits. Now, just as a recap, your soul is the part of you that's in association with this sun. It exists independent of your relationship to the earth. So when you leave the earth, you're still going to be with your soul. Your spirit is that part of you that's incarnated in relationship to the earth, but beyond this lifetime. So you retain the presence, the intensity, the personality, the intentions that you carry from lifetime to lifetime in your spirit. Some people's spirits get so focused on this lifetime that they're out of association with their soul, but they're also in a place that's not conscious. So they're not in direct relationship to their human mind. Their thoughts don't exist in their brain. Why does this matter? Because you might encounter them, but the person that you might meet, who is them, wouldn't be able to have a conversation with you about it. They're cut off from that too. They're cut off from their soul and their human consciousness. They're just in the spirit. And some of them are not pleasant. Some of them are not pleasant at all. They're out there orchestrating their lives and they're playing it like a game, and they're playing it like a somewhat vicious game. Now, there is a vicious game going on. You don't have to play at its core, but it's happening, and pretending otherwise is not effective. And many beings commit so much of their consciousness to playing it well that that's where they are. And they've made a choice to sacrifice their relationship to a more eternal love in order to be present here. And they're fighting. They're fighting. And they'll fight with you. And as soon as they recognize you and that you recognize them, you're even in a little bit more of a concerning position. I remember once I lived in a cabin in a rural community, and I was changing a lot. I was in isolation. I was singing a lot. And after several months, I was invited in and I stayed in a community house for a while. And a stranger came to the community house, a friend of a friend. And I felt like the person look at me, and then I felt the thought, "You're very loud." And immediately I got a thought ball that communicated that they were basically telling me, not just in this moment, not just in the moment where I was connected to them in that house, I was being criticized for how loud I was out in the rural community, that I was bothering people. And I had a bit of a conversation with this being in a way that was quite unpleasant. very unpleasant. They lived within an entirely different range of rules. And it wasn't totally irrational. They were trying to keep some frequencies calm while they were willing to accentuate and fight in ways that were well beyond the bounds of what I considered to be acceptable. So when I thoroughly opened my ability to traverse these boundaries and mirrors, I ended up in a lot of different conscious states that it's very challenging to navigate. I had to learn about the rules of the land. And that's one of the natural consequences of wanting to be telepathic too much. I wanted it so much that I wasn't careful enough to build in a caution with how I was learning. And much of the time, my desire was just me throwing myself against a mirror wall. But over time, the intensity of my commitment and desire to get there worked. And then I had to, really piece together, what are the survival tactics that I have to develop in order to make this work? And the start that I give you is preferable to the start that I had, which is I'm trying to give you a lay of the land. It's not all love in the form that you might consider. It's not all bliss in the manner you may have accessed from time to time. When you make the change, when you go through the transformation from one level of recognizing other people, other beings, into drawing that into normalcy. So you get these windows of intensity that cut through what's normal to you. And you go, oh my God, there's this big open world out there. But really, you're only getting a peek into what's possible. When you make the transition to normalize that kind of interaction, everything's different. It's worth it, in my opinion, because it's true, because it's broad, because it's expansive in a manner that makes this life more exciting. But you really have to prioritize that, which is why I'm just like over and over again, I'm making these cautions with you. I don't mean to dampen your enthusiasm, but I'm trying to dampen your enthusiasm. I want you to, shift excitement into discipline and then remind you it's worth it. It's worth it. You just have to really, really recenter in this life, because doing yoga recenters you in your body and allows you to have an expansive consciousness. Singing allows you to be present with the emotions you're feeling in this life and yet open to a broader awareness of what's possible. But if you don't continuously reinvest in this body, in this consciousness in a way that centers your thoughts and feelings, you'll just disperse in a way that gravitates to often confusing and violent and unpleasant beings. And you just have to come to terms with the fact that that's out there, and you can learn to navigate around it. And if you have bumped into such painful interactions, do your best to consider it a learning tool and develop ways to focus in a manner that transcends it, that skirts around it, that dances past it, or just simply learns to not invest in a whole range of conscious states altogether. But often you can't make that choice until you kind of explore enough to recognize where they are to begin with. All right. I'm imagining a color. I'm imagining a color. What color is it? There we go. Type it in. Look, I might have done this on purpose, but I didn't choose to, but the chat's off. This happened once before. I didn't know why or how. It's probably preferable because of last week's drama, but I'm sorry. I really like talking to you guys, and at the moment, I'm not going to be able to. And I think from my research, once it's off to begin with, there's no way I can turn it on. I've even tried to step out and change it. So after last week's chat bombing, I wouldn't want to go through that again. However, I don't know what I'm going to do in the future because live readings aren't possible if 100 people might show up and ruin everything, or at least we have to be prepared to, change tactics. Now, my excitement is this. I'm certainly not going to give up on live feeds altogether. I don't know how this class is going to function. It's going to keep functioning in some manner. We'll see. But I was thinking, something really simple that I can do if the chat window gets taken over is to transition everyone into doing the keyring meditation this week, certainly by next week, but maybe even within the next couple of days. I've got a great version of the keyring meditation going. It's going to be about 13 minutes. It's got some extraordinarily awesome, in my opinion, awesome graphics that Miguel made. The unique ornaments. It's been around for a while and he developed the quick 12 chakra meditation video, and we've been working on a better one. And this animation stuff is going to really help focus in. It zooms in on a chakra and then shows you the color for the chakra. And I'm going to guide you through how to meditate in a way that focuses that chakra and moves on from one to another with about a minute for each chakra, which is just an awesome amount of time. When you can spend 13 minutes on this care for yourself and a minute on each chakra, you can really get a lot done. And it's something that, I absolutely hope will be a good teaching tool to teach you how to do it on your own. Then using the video sometimes absolutely accentuates that, makes it more effective. And ideally, it'll be built in. And then it would be a great thing to use during a chat bomb experience because it's like, okay, well, we can't do what we were doing, but we'll just adjust around this and do something else. That's awesome and inspiring. That's the news. Another piece of the news is yesterday was my birthday. I had a great day. It was really fun. We had a barbecue in the backyard, effectively barbecued steak, which went, it's not something I've often done. I've been like, I'm permanently torn about meat. I was vegan for a long time. Certainly eating meat has been necessary for my experience. And yet somehow when you eat hot dogs and hamburgers, it's less daunting. It sort of distances from the experience. Steak, there's no distancing what this is. And the intensity of that was daunting. Cooking it over a fire, there's something primal about, and it was a good day. I enjoyed it. And I'm glad oh man, I'm looking back at my past, and I'm inviting you to do this in this moment. I'm looking back at my past and realizing all these things that I left behind. I was talking earlier in this class about how much I set aside the things I loved. I set aside the things that inspired me and entertained me because I was going for this knowledge so thoroughly. I wanted to block out everything else. Nothing else even affected me as much. It just didn't seem to matter. It wasn't exciting. It wasn't interesting because I was learning how to be telepathic. I was learning how to connect with my higher soul. I was learning how to feel energy and recognize what my own spirit was talking to me about. What does Pink Floyd matter? Well, I'm finding that I still love Pink Floyd. I still love some of the things I loved when I was young. And it's really exciting because I don't seem to be losing anything about what I've learned in the meantime. I seem to be more inspired. And that's fun. I guess this is what happens when, I'm about to have another child. So then I'll have kids. And I think maybe this is part of what happens is I thoroughly center in being a father and being middle-aged. It's not about learning new things anymore. Maybe it's just about appreciating what I know I do love. And I hope I'll open to some of the inspirations, new entertainment and creativity for sure. But it's sort of nice to love what I love and to accept myself a little more deeply, re-embrace parts of myself that I lost. So that's something I'm going through. And it's a bit of a birthday present to myself I'm going to go after this and go to the puzzle store and get a puzzle because I used to love puzzles. Like, three-dimensional things that you have to try to take apart and stuff like that. It really focuses and calms my mind. I'll tell you, Color. I'm thinking of a color. Giving you another chance. Type it in the comments. Focus on your third eye. Breathe with it. And ask yourself, what color am I sending you? Type it. Everything talks. You have a communicator, a filter within you that I highly recommend you use. I rarely open myself so much that I hear different voices. You have the ability to adjust this. You need to know that. When I first opened my consciousness, I heard different voices very starkly. I heard the personality, the depth in a way that was very exciting. It was much more exciting than how I live it at the moment. But it also meant that strange forces stepped in. And when they stepped in, I couldn't distance myself from them. It took days to get away from some of the consciousness I found then. And over time, I prayed for help, and I found this sort of resting state, this compromise, where I hear a fairly consistent voice. It's sort of like the computer, like when you get the computer to read to you. And so I can interpret from all sorts of different sources. And it's really this simple once you get it to work. It's kind of like, for real? Could it really be this simple? And it's like, yeah, it's this simple. You just say, interpret what that cat is saying. Interpret what that person's higher self wants to tell me. And as a result, you get to you have this filter. So it always sounds the same, and that makes it much easier to distance. It makes it much easier to turn it off. You say, I want to hear this, and you open and you listen. And it's not listening, it's a sixth sense. So it's you allow your sense, your awareness to embrace it. Now, the next level that I encourage you to engage is not vocalization. The vocalization can get in the way of your ability to think so much that it's better to kind of keep it on bay. And you keep it on bay by intending to. You keep it at bay by intending to, by saying, I want to only listen to this through my filter, through my interpreter. You have this inner interpreter. When you keep it at bay in that way, then I find that it's easiest to say, give me visuals. Interpret what they have to tell me through a visual. And these are things you can practice. I'm trying to give you the tools sort of carefully for how to practice this stuff one at a time. The psychic skills class introduces the screen. This is like basic stuff that you could practice so much, and it would bless you deeply to keep doing it. Then you get to put it to use by saying, I want to hear not just from myself, because the best way to practice is by saying, tell me what my heart chakra has to tell me through a visual. Tell me what my gut has to tell me through a visual. Now you say, tell me what that being has to tell me through a visual. A very effective tool that I use when I get overwhelmed is I say, I'll receive the words from another being, but I want to see them as text on my screen. It works really well. So then I hold the intention to only experience a telepathic connection to the text. And I see the text appear, and it slows it down. And when I slow it down, I have the ability to kind of parse through it without feeling as overwhelmed. So you have to know that these are your options. In the other regard, and this is probably a big part of how I broke through to be this aware, you can turn it into song. So you intentionally open to more information at once by allowing it to be a song. So strong, get along with the feelings that you have inside. My pride can diminish a little bit each day when I learn to embrace myself this way. I find that there's a much broader expanse to my mind, and I rewind when I miss, and yet then I have to learn to kiss who I was goodbye, because I don't always want to fly. Sometimes it's time to run. And in fact, it can be much more fun. You need to be able to transition between different ranges of pace, rhythm, amount of information communicated at once. And every threshold that you cross expands your ability to communicate with other beings. And I assure you, again and again and again, I promise you, one of the biggest boundaries to learning more is to be able to say no. Don't just ask for yes. Don't just say more, 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 more. You need this balance of the brake and the gas. And when you offer restraint, you begin to trust yourself. I'm not trying to get you to be overly cautious. I don't want you to be so hesitant that you don't ever get beyond the boundaries of what you know. But, see if you can do it gracefully. See if you could, recognize the way in which you're a student driver at first, sort of going fast and then screeching to a halt, going fast, and then learn to develop a gracefulness in how you learn more. And you will just glide right past boundaries that have been fixed, firm as a brick. Because your consciousness itself is there. Your higher self vetoes your ability to access different ranges of reality. And it vetoes that in order to keep you safe. And the gifts are, they're worth it. It's just, it requires a deeper level of discipline than many people may want. And I promise you, the yoga has a lot to do with it. When you get in your body, you're safer. One of my first introductions, one of many people's first introductions to consciousness beyond the ranges that were ghosts. First of all, it's in the pop culture, so it was there for me to anticipate. So I was looking for it. I remember I had a friend tell me an extremely intense ghost story late at night when I was living in a big house by myself. And she told me this story in a way that just shattered. I was at the time, astounded that it was real. So I listened for half an hour. She really built it up, and she was honest. When someone's lying to you or not. And then I hung up the phone. That night, I felt the presence of a being who I'd known was in the house, but man, it was far more present than it had ever been before. And over the course of the next several years, I sort of haphazardly discovered that when I was scared and overwhelmed, one of the best things I could do was yoga. Physical yoga, asana vinyasa, the flow and the movement of poses. Get in your body. Ghosts can't do that. They don't have bodies. So when you use your attention to reach beyond the boundaries of what you know, and often you get cold. You've experienced this, or you at least know about it in stories. It's a real thing. When you feel the presence of a disembodied, so a spirit that used to be in a body, they left their body, but they didn't transition into the light. It's a real thing, very real. They get stuck. Disassociated from their own higher self. And when they're there, it's cold. It's cold. It's very cold. Light is the movement of particles. So that movement, motion creates heat. When they're out of association with the light, the core light, for now, just think of it as the core light of the sun, although there's an interplay between the core light of the sun and the core light of the earth. We'll get into some other time. That light you can be out of association with, even though you're here. So out of tune with the light. When they're out of tune with the light, they're more still. They have much less motion to their consciousness. It's cold. Coldness is the stillness of the particles. It's cold. It's cold on a level that's frightening. So when your consciousness, perhaps through excitement, perhaps through inadvertently getting snagged, gets drawn into a deeper awareness of the presence of a spirit of someone who's departed, you want to get out of it. Now, a lot of times it's let's exercise this. Let's get rid of it. Sure, that's a great idea. It's possible. It happens. But it's more up within your range of power to simply get back in your body. They're not in a body. They draw on your strength by getting you to pay attention to them. But if you get back in your body by doing yoga, you'll be more in your body and you'll be able to disassociate and do this with a ghost. It works. And over time, you get the ability to choose to connect and then disconnect, and then connect and then disconnect. And that's really an exciting space to be. And it's the same skills that enable you to connect to a being's higher self. It's the same skills that enable you to connect to animals. It's the same skills that enable you to connect to the spirits of people who are living in a kind of brutal range of reality on Earth. All these skills kind of come together. And at a certain point, you can't restrict yourself to learning about ghosts without learning about higher selves, or you can't restrict yourself to learning about higher selves without learning about ghosts. So that's why you kind of have to dive in and register the potentials and develop the skills and be prepared for the concerns in order to get the depth perception to navigate this stuff well. And it's worth it. In my experience, it's very worth it. Last time. Third eye. Breathe. What color am I sending you? I'm going to tune in, see if there's anything else I have to wrap up before I say goodbye. I am sorry not to do readings. I was open to it, although part of me, I'm very in conflict about how these classes are going to go for a while. So I'm going with the fact that the chat window dramatically turned itself off today. Incidentally, you can tune into the consciousness of Google. For real. You can tune into the consciousness of Apple. You can tune into the consciousness of any organization in the world. They're there, and they're often more loving than you'd expect. That's not to say dive in and be friends with everybody, but not because they're bad, because you have to make choices. There's a limit to how much you can keep yourself in connection with, because they're all on different frequencies. You don't want to have to retune yourself constantly. So that's something that's a little bit safer to experiment with, but most of all, I encourage you to pray to angels. Michael, Thoth, Jesus. Stick to the basics in my experience, because you get a much broader range of exposure to what's real, grounded in their love. In conclusion, I would like to invite you to really commit to yourself. If you've got a better way to do this, I'm so supportive. But my best way to be present in my body in a manner that helps navigate through all these extremes is to do not just a yoga practice, but a yoga practice that involves repetition, that's graceful, and that's up to you, that helps you tune into your breath, that helps you change course within the practice. I'm doing my best to teach in that way, where I put you in a position to tune into yourself, make choices that help you accentuate whatever's, your best opportunity today, and deal with whatever tensions you might be having in a manner that keeps you in your body, allows you to expand beyond your body, but have a wonderful place to return to. If you don't cultivate how beautiful this is, you're just, trying to avoid reality, and it won't work for long. You always get dragged back into your body and whatever suffering exists here. So I can't encourage you enough to recognize the interplay between going deep, learning about spiritual extremes, and then returning and living the best life possible. Every avenue that I've explored into extreme knowledge brings you back to this. We chose to be here in this body. It's a wonderful place to be, particularly when you take care of it. And I'm doing my best to help you. Mondays, 3:30. From now on, I'm not going to be doing live anymore. I'm going to be posting videos that I've produced beforehand. So yesterdays, I'm still figuring out how to do this, but hopefully I'll get good at it soon. There we go. Much love be with you and your family.